Protests are an American tradition. So why do we find them so irritating? Welcome to the Bill Radke treatment. The 99%ers, as they call themselves, have spread from Occupy Wall Street to Occupy Seattle at Westlake Park downtown. These protesters have been praised and mocked and resented and compared to the Tea Party movement, which I would think the Tea Partiers hate. But I don't know. We'll find out this hour because my guests with me in the studio are Keli Carender, legislative coordinator for the Tea Party Patriots. Welcome, Keli.
Thanks for having me.
And Mark Taylor-Canfield, who is a member of the media working group for Occupy Seattle. Welcome, Mark.
Thanks a lot.
First of all, do you two hate each other?
I don't hate anybody, so no.
Yes, I have no hatred in my heart.
You did shake hands.
Yeah.
Okay, because I thought we could, because when I look at you two, and I think I speak for a lot of my listeners, I see people with a lot in common. I have never held a protest sign at a rally in my life. I see two people who care a lot about making America a better place. Because you don't hate each other. Do you feel like you have more in common or more in opposition with each other?
Well, I think it's pretty obvious that there are a lot of issues like the Wall Street bailout and the bailout of the banks, which is a common issue. I think there's definitely, I cannot speak for everyone who participates in the Occupy Wall Street protests.
Yes, and we're going to get into that fact too, that it's really hard to speak for a whole bunch of people with a lot of cares. Yes.
I think, there is an attitude that rich corporations are actually hoarding a lot of wealth right now, and the middle class and working people and the poor are really suffering. So that's definitely an issue. Closing corporate tax loopholes would be a good idea, and maybe some breaks for middle class and small businesses would be good.
So that's Mark Taylor-Canfield with Occupy Seattle, and in fact, he mentioned the bailouts. And Keli, you told me right before we started that it's the bailouts, is that right, that sort of got you involved in the Tea Party?
I mean, that was the trigger for a lot of us, and we didn't take to the streets until after the stimulus. The stimulus bill was sort of the final straw for most of us, but it really started to build. And, a lot of us talk about when George Bush said he had to abandon the free market principles to save the free market. I mean, we all just went, and we've spent how long defending you? For what? Why? Why did we do this if that's the sort of thought process that you have? So it really started out with the bailouts and crony capitalism. We're believers in free market capitalism, truly free market capitalism, and not some sort of crony capitalist society. And we see the bailouts and the cronyism as perverting what capitalism can really be. And so I think we do have a lot in common as far as the bailouts go and ending crony capitalism and those sorts of things. Definitely not in agreement on any sort of wealth redistribution,
right? Or
the idea that the wealthy can't create wealth or keep their wealth if they want. And, all sorts of different policy ideas about how to broaden the tax base and make it more fair, et cetera.
Okay, so I want to get into this idea of what you each think very differently about the free market, its possibilities, its limitations. But before we get to differences, you both mentioned crony capitalism, basically. So would you say that you have in common a love of, quote, government of the people, by the people, for the people?
Yeah, absolutely.
Amen.
Amen. Okay.
Yes.
And that's what I see. I see groups wanting the greatest happiness for the most people. I don't know if that's fair. The more specific I get, maybe the more I'm going to wade into differences. But so I'm wondering whether the media often compare and contrast Mark, Occupy Seattle, Keli, Tea Party. Do you see them as opposites or opponents, Mark?
Well, obviously, a lot of the Occupy Wall Street participants, and by the way, we are not controlled by any political party or any particular economic or political philosophy. So,
and the Tea Party isn't either. You mentioned being frustrated with George Bush, right?
Right, and don't let the establishment try to take you over, because they will.
I have a criticism of some of the media coverage, which is that at least conservative commentators often cast us as being pawns of President Barack Obama. And I can tell you that there are very, very few people down there right now who are happy with what our president has done since he's been elected, because a lot of the people who supported him feel like a lot of the promises have been broken.
Yeah, that's one thing I find interesting about the reaction to President Obama is that I hear him called a socialist on one hand, and I hear from liberals who are frustrated with how moderate. I'm sort of like, I'm confused. Is this president a socialist head-knocking tyrant, or is he a wimpy in the pocket of corporations, nothing done?
He's a corporatist that likes to redistribute wealth like a socialist.
How does a corporate? So do corporatists appreciate that about him? He's a corporatist who
I think the people. Now, I don't look at corporations as a monolithic entity. I think there are good corporations, there are good people running corporations, but there are some people that don't want to operate in a truly free market. They want favors, they want subsidies, they want kickbacks, all those sorts of things. And I think those are the people that appreciate Barack Obama.
Monopoly capitalism does not work. The system is broken. We have 46 million people living in poverty and hundreds and hundreds of homeless people living on the streets. I think we can agree on that. President Barack Obama and his place in the political spectrum, I don't think is as important as the fact that people. This is not a left or right issue. People on both sides feel that they've been sold out by their own elected representatives in government.
So you've both criticized Bush and Obama. Who's a leader that you love?
That's a good question. I don't really have one right now.
Really?
The people, my fellow Tea Party patriots.
Yeah. Mark?
I also think that the people in the streets, or the people down at Westlake Center, a lot of them are very passionate and very community-minded people who really want economic and social justice. But I can say that Martin Luther King Jr. and Gandhi are definitely two of my heroes.
So both of you feel like neither one of you named at least a current leader. You're shaking your head, Mark. But you both talk as if the people you trust and admire are the people with you on the street. Who would you suppose, which the Tea Party or Occupy Seattle? Sorry to play these off, but these are the two big groups now. Who do you think has more adherents? Who has more popular support? Keli, your team, or Mark, your team?
In Seattle? Probably Occupy Seattle. I mean, it's not really known to be a conservative or libertarian hotbed in Seattle. I mean, nationally, I don't know. I think, speaking of pundits and politicians who speak about your movement, I mean, from day one, because we criticized Barack Obama, we've been labeled as racist. And I don't see any of that sort of character maligning happening with Occupy Wall Street or Seattle. And I think that we got blamed for the Gabrielle Giffords shooting, which we know we had nothing to do with. So we've been blamed for a lot of ills. It was the Tea Party downgrade. There was a memo circulated by Chuck Schumer saying that they're going to start referring to it as the Tea Party recession. So we've been blamed for a lot of things. So I know that our so-called popularity has taken a hit because of that. So I have no idea at this point. They're so new. They've only been around a few weeks. Who knows what's going to happen?
So, Keli, you feel your character, the Tea Party's character, has been assassinated. Mark,
yeah.
What about Occupy Wall Street, Seattle?
I've heard commentators and even journalists in the news media sort of poking fun at the kids down at Westlake Center as just a bunch of homeless kids who have nothing better to do. You know what? They have a lot of things that they could be doing besides sleeping in the cold and the rain down at Westlake Center. There are better places to sleep.
How are we going to settle this? Who's been more belittled, the Tea Party or the 99% occupiers?
Me. Well, I mean, come on. Have you ever been called a racist in your life? Do you know how much that hurts? Do you know how horrible that is? I mean, my parents are Tea Partiers, and they marched with Coretta Scott King during the Civil Rights Movement, and they get called racist all the time. I mean, I think the worst thing you could ever do is call somebody a racist, especially when they're not. And I'm not trying to make light of anything that they Occupy people have been called or anything like that. But I find it an interesting phenomenon to observe though they may be getting belittled, it's in a different way than we were. And it'll just be interesting to see how it plays out.
So, Mark, will you accept that Keli means it when she says my and our feelings? This isn't just a name-calling thing, but our feelings actually do get hurt by the labels put on us. Do you believe her?
That the folks in the Tea Party have their feelings hurt?
Yeah.
Well, obviously, I can hear it in her voice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I have to point out that there are some very big differences between these two movements, And, I don't necessarily agree with all of the platform of the Tea Party or all of the political views of the people involved. But like I said, I don't even see this as a political issue. I see this as an economic issue. That's what we're dealing with, whether you're on the left, the right, or the middle. Or, I think both sides have their extremists for sure.
Right.
But this is an economic issue. This is, to me, I'm only speaking personally on that issue. This is not a political issue. It's economic.
Yeah, and I want to get into the economics of this because, boy, even economists don't agree. So I'm sort of fascinated with how each of you can be so confident in your different takes on the best way to raise all boats and to distribute wealth. We're going to get into that a little bit later, but and we're going to take a break here in a moment. But are your feelings hurt by what is said about Occupy Seattle?
Well, what's difficult, and I'm sure she understands this, that when you've been working really hard on something that you believe very strongly in, like what we're doing down there is direct democracy. I mean, Aristotle said your city shouldn't be bigger than the ability of the person in the back row to hear the speaker, So that's how we're doing it down there. And I think when you're spending hours and hours and hours having meetings and trying to educate yourself and reach out to people, when you hear people in the media who pick maybe one or two people that they've interviewed and cast them as a stereotype for the entire movement, it does hurt your feelings because we get tired. We've worked really hard. We haven't slept much. And then to be bashed in the media does not feel good.
Keli, you're nodding your head.
Yeah, I mean, we've been doing this for almost 3 years, and it's just been one punch in the face after another. So, I totally understand what he's saying.
Okay, so we're going to take a break on that note. Two people trying to institute direct democracy and getting punched in the head. My guests are a Tea Partier, an Occupy Seattler, and we'll reintroduce them and continue the conversation in a moment on the Bill Radke Treatment.
Get up, stand up. Stand up for your right. Get up, stand up. Stand up for your right. Get up, stand up. Stand up for your right. Get up, stand up. Don't give up the fight.
Two very different protests, except so far, in many ways, similar. My guests on the Bill Radke Treatment are Mark Taylor-Canfield with Occupy Seattle, Keli Carender with the Tea Party Patriots. Welcome back to both of you.
Thank you.
So we just started to touch on the best way to move money around in this country, and you both disagree about that. So I want to ask you why. Before we get into that, we haven't had a chance to get to know you much. So Keli, tell us, who you are and how you got into the Tea Party Patriot movement.
Okay.
You just started out an average person like a lot of us, and then what?
Well, I used to teach math to inner city adults for a local nonprofit. And then in 2008, when the bailouts occurred, the Wall Street bailouts, but also, the auto bailouts, and as I mentioned, when George Bush talked about abandoning free market principles, I had gone to school overseas and I'd been traveling, so I wasn't around a lot and I wasn't really thinking about a lot of stuff. But once I got back and I started really seeing what was going on, I started to get very upset. And that's when the tinder started to burn, sort of a slow burn. And then with the stimulus bill on top of it, and just the process of governance seeming to bypass a lot of the people's wishes and just this rush to do everything before anybody can even read a bill. Just finally, it was the last straw.
Had you ever demonstrated about anything before?
God, no.
God, no.
No, conservatives don't protest. It's just...
Conservatives don't protest. I guess that's not true anymore.
Not true anymore.
Mark Taylor-Canfield, how did you get active with Occupy Seattle? What drove you to the street? And by the way, are you camping out in Westlake Park these days? Or?
I'm not camping, but I've spent nights there, yes.
Okay. What got you there?
I've been pretty much involved in a lot of activism all my life. I actually was here during the anti-WTO protests. But I'm a journalist, and I actually originally went to the Occupy Seattle events after the second day to cover it. And once I got there, I decided that I wanted to join, which means that I can't report on it now that I'm in it. and I ended up talking to the media, which was kind of a switch. But yeah, I've always been concerned with economic and social injustice in this country because we're sold this idea of this idealism about democracy and free speech and a lot of other issues that our country was based on that I think have been violated many, many, many times over.
Can I just jump? There's something he said that really, I know we're not supposed to try to disagree, but
yes.
There's something that caught my attention that you just said, which is before I had my first protest, that 3 days before Rick Santelli had his big rant that sort of triggered the
This was a
phrase Tea
CNBC
Party.
commentator who ranted against the bailouts
Right.
and really fired a lot of people.
Yeah, because I told you I was frustrated and I planned this protest for President's Day of 2009. And right before I planned it, I was sitting on my couch and I was just so depressed thinking, this is all a sham. I've been taught my entire life that being an American means something, that America is different than every other country because we have our voices are heard. This is a government that's run by the people. And all I have to do is call my representative and everything will be okay, and then all these people were calling about things saying, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. And they just did it anyways. And I just remember that's what was so upsetting was, wow, this is a total sham. And so it was either just sort of give up and accept that as a new reality in my life or not. And so I decided not.
Man, I'm going to forget which one of you is on which side because I'm hearing the same passion about government for the people not working and it's hitting you hard.
Here's the thing. I think if the two various groups could find a couple of very focused items and not even because I think we've said we agree on that the bailouts are bad. We both don't like crony capitalism, but we probably have different solutions on how to deal with ending crony capitalism.
Yes.
So I don't think we could be a team on ending on the solutions to actually end it, but maybe we could sort of team up to get to the point where we end it, and then we could battle each other for the outcome. Or,
right, let's agree we have a problem.
Right, exactly.
The Occupy Wall Street movement is very, very diverse. So there are differing opinions on all sides. There was a soldier, a U.S. I believe he's an Army soldier, with our protest for 2 days in full dress uniform, holding a sign that said, "We support the people." I think the stereotypes are actually being broken down now because I've always had this issue with the neoconservatives and the neoliberals and the fact that they are all for all of these free trade agreements, which are outsourcing all of our jobs overseas and really damaging our country economically. And like as she's saying, I think that maybe our solutions are different, but I think that a lot of people right now want to declare their independence. As we declared our independence from Great Britain, that when we started this country, a lot of us want to declare our independence from the established political parties and the corporations that control them.
So let's pick one of the issues you've mentioned, how to get rid of crony capitalism. Because I get that the Occupy Wall Streeters have been saying we need to get this corporate money out of politics, but I think of that as a free market. I think of that the Tea Party would disagree with that the Supreme Court saying unlimited corporate money in politics.
Well,
that's the law of the land. How does the Tea Party and how do you feel about that,
I'll
Keli?
give you, because we don't have a lot of time, obviously, but just as a real, 30,000-foot overview, we believe that decentralizing a lot of decisions, one of the questions we want people to start asking when laws are made is who decides. So if it's healthcare or banking decisions, whatever the law is that's being looked at, we should always ask the question, which I think we haven't for generations, is who decides that? Should that be a decision of the federal government, the state government, the county, the city, the neighborhood, the family, the individual? Where is that decision best made? And we believe that the best decisions are made when they're closer to the people. I mean, how many times you can go to a city council meeting, look your city reps right in the eye, testify at a hearing, speak face to face with them. But how many of us can go to Washington, D.C. all the time? I don't even think any of us would be allowed to testify at a congressional hearing, unless you're a 4-star general or an executive of some company or something. So we believe that the solution comes in bringing all the decision-making power closer to home. That way, we give less power to the centralized government, where lobbyists only need to buy, a few people. They can all go to K Street.
There's a connection to
power. The
lobbyists.
power influence is right there. You send all the decision-making power out among the states and among the people. How can they keep up with that?
Mark, I see you nodding your head.
Well, I was just thinking that when it comes to the elections, our electoral system, I think it's pretty much broken too at this point, and that's what is sparking a lot of the protest and a lot of the frustration amongst the people, because I mean, we are the people and we need to be involved in those decisions, and it can become really discouraging when you're trying to work with the political system. When it costs $5 million to run for the U.S. Congress House of Representatives, okay, we know that people who have that kind of fundraising ability are probably not going to be people that we spend a lot of time with and know our issues and are going to be responsive to us, because they're going to be responsive to the people who have funded that campaign.
Okay, we're going to take a break again. Wow, so I just learned something I didn't understand about the Tea Party take on the problem with decision-making in this country. And I'm hearing really a lot in common, again, between my guests, Tea Partier and Occupy Seattle, are about returning decision-making to the people. We're going to talk about, I want to get back to my original question about whether these protests ought to be a source of irritation and mockery, as honestly I think they are to a lot of people. They're frustrating to watch. And I'm going to get into that in a moment on the Bill Radke Treatment. Welcome back to the Bill Radke Treatment. Protests, an American tradition. You brought up the Revolutionary War yourself, Mark. Why do we find protests so irritating then in this country? Mark Taylor-Canfield, with the Media Working Group for Occupy Seattle, and you would think his disagreeer in every way, but so far not necessarily so. Keli Carender is with the Tea Party Patriots. So you've both hit the street on behalf of government, of the people, by the people, for the people. Tell me if I'm wrong. I feel like a whole lot of people, maybe a lot of our listeners, look at these protests and see a bunch of rabble-rousers get a job or quit whining, or they see you as being, hateful or potentially violent. So let's start with Occupy Seattle, because that's in the news right now. Mark, I've heard this over and over. The movement, Occupy Seattle, whatever you want to call them, Occupy Wall Street, 99%ers, you are incoherent. You got a bunch of wild-eyed, unshaven radical types shooting off at the mouth about you have no idea what. How focused does your message need to be?
Well, I think that's one of the strengths of the strength of our movement is actually the fact that we do not have any particular leaders. We do not have any particular party controlling it. And it's really hard to pin us down. That way, we aren't as easily stereotyped or labeled by the media. But in terms of, I keep coming back to this idea that people who agree with Occupy Seattle are obviously going to say, rah, 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 patriotic Americans, out there giving it to the government, giving it to the man. Mm-hmm. People who disagree with us are going to say that we're a bunch of scraggly, crazy people who don't know what we're talking about. And I would assume that that's true of the Tea Party as well. People who agree with the Tea Party politically...
But I'm saying people are having trouble agreeing or disagreeing with Occupy Seattle because seems like a lot of different agendas.
It is a very, very diverse movement, I have to admit. And I think that's just part of the process. As was mentioned earlier by the other guests, this is a new movement, and right. People are getting organized and we're educating each other. But there are some very, very simple issues about economic justice that we pretty much all agree on.
Keli Carender with the Tea Party Patriots, do you agree? Do you give the Occupy Seattlers that much credit that, hey, we went through growing pains too. It's early on. Your message will coalesce. Or do you also see them as being all over the map in some way that the Tea Party hasn't been?
Well, I assume that they'll mature and they'll find their stride, and they'll probably coalesce further around a more clarified idea or message.
You think Occupy Seattle will be as successful as the Tea Party has been?
I don't know. It's really hard to say. I mean, I think... I would have no way of being able to predict that at all. I have had a little bit of trouble. I've been trying to follow it and see what's going on. And I've had a little trouble following just what exactly are the the asks. What exactly are they looking for?
Is that how the Tea Party talks about it? We got to come up with asks?
No, that's just my way of phrasing it. But the Tea Party we did have it really was triggered by the bailout. So, we were sort of, I guess, lucky in a way that I don't think we had as many growing pains as far as a more unified message, because it started with the bailouts, remember, and then the stimulus. And so there was a real issue right at the forefront of what, in the news, what was going on. It was very easy to talk about, but same thing, we have a completely diverse group of people who think, even on the same issue, they might be on the same side, but they'll be in a spectrum on that one side of where they fall in that spectrum. And then on issues outside of, we've come up with 3 principles that we try to focus on only, which is free markets, constitutionally limited government, and fiscal responsibility. And so if it falls outside of those, social issues, things like that, we really just say, there's other groups that already deal with any side of any social issue or things like that. So go join those other groups if you want to work on that.
Okay, so I've been dying to talk about the free market because it's so hard to get economists to agree on what the best way to distribute or not distribute wealth is. So what is it that makes you... So I hear the Occupy Seattlers saying that social disparity, the wealth disparity, is gone too far. The rich get richer. That's not even a liberal conservative thing. I know I didn't start making money till I had money. We know the rich get richer, right? That's... Well,
we also know that there's fluidity in the various, if you want to call them classes or income levels. And if you look at the data over time, you see that people are constantly falling out of the quote unquote rich, and people are constantly moving up, and people tend to become richer as they get older. So they may have started out in poverty in their 20s, at the poverty level in their 20s, and by the time they're 55, they're now considered rich.
Okay,
and
I
do think it's interesting to note that the top 1% means anybody making over $380,000, which we know in New York City could be a cop married to a teacher.
Uh-huh.
We
might have found an area of real disagreement here, because I hear you saying that the beauty of our system, of our free market system, is that you can move back and forth between classes, unlike old Europe, for example. But Mark, what I hear the Occupy Wall Street are saying is that ability to change classes, to change your situation, is getting smaller and smaller, that the wealth is getting more and more concentrated and rigid. Is that fair?
Well, a lot of that is economic. We're experiencing a major economic downturn in this country. So people are having their houses foreclosed on. They're losing their medical insurance and their jobs. So I would say that right now, a lot of people are suffering economically who a few years ago might have been considered a part of the at least upper middle class.
Yeah,
and
so
that is definitely an issue.
Keli, we've seen some middle class people fall downward out of that.
Right. And a lot of Tea Partiers would argue that some of those initial situations or circumstances that caused that to happen came from government itself. So, the Community Reinvestment Act helping to create the housing bubble. Government intervention in certain markets distorting things, and that government messes things up, and then they go in and try to fix the problem, and they make it worse, and then they have to fix that problem, and so they do something else, and it creates a bunch of stumbling blocks to people trying to increase their own wealth and move up from wherever they are.
And Mark, would you accept that our relatively free market system has helped us have a higher standard of living than other countries around the world?
We do not have free enterprise in the United States. We have corporate monopolies, and the free trade agreements have definitely made that obvious. So I think that the system is rigged, and I think people are really, really upset about it, and they want change.
Can I start just real quickly? I also think there's a difference of focus. The Tea Party is very, very focused on the politicians who make the public policy and who make the decisions, and we want to change them. We're not necessarily going to go after other private citizens. We don't talk a lot about greed. I believe anybody should be able to try to make money. I don't think they should cheat people or be corrupt, but I think anybody can try to create wealth for themselves and their families. But I want to go after the political system and take on the politicians. And my little bit of advice for you guys, and something that we're working on, is the primaries. The primaries are the soft underbelly of our system, and the parties control the primaries. And if you want to get rid of corruption, take people on in the primaries.
Say more about that. What's your advice What's your advice about the primary?
Well, I'm saying if we disagree, if on whatever issues, obviously the Tea Party has spent a lot of time in the Republican Party because that was our easiest entry into the system. But it's not that we like Republicans more, it's just that was the easy entry into the system. If it turns out that the easiest entry into the system for them is the Democrats, then I'm saying...
You want to use those political parties for your ends. Is that right?
Well, and I'm saying you have to primary them out, because if we start showing them that there are term limits, because elections are term limits, right? But we need to primary them out, because something like 85% of the people who run for office run unopposed and win their general election because of the way everything is set up.
We're just about out of time, and here I love that we ended on a Tea Party patriot giving advice to an Occupy Wall Streeter.
Yeah, because we're not very interested in electoral politics at this point. People think that is not effective.
Okay. Well, I love that you have come in here and kind of laid your hearts out, talked about what you've got in common, what you don't have in common. I really do see two people who love this country. I really do. And I appreciate you coming in and talking about really the issue of the moment, protest and where this country is headed. Keli Carender, Tea Party patriot, Mark Taylor-Canfield, Occupy Seattle, thank you.
Thanks for
Bill.
having us.
Appreciate it.
This is the Bill Radke Treatment, produced by Jason Antebbe and Marcia Davis. And you can get a podcast of this show and all our shows at mynorthwest.com. And I hope you'll join me again next weekend for the Bill Radke Treatment on the all-new 97.3 Cairo FM weekends.